Welcome to the Ego versus EQ and You podcast, where we discuss the key aspects of emotional intelligence and ways to apply it in everyday living. Now let's work together to make common sense more common. Hi, welcome back to the Ego versus EQ and You podcast. I'm your host, Jen, and today we're going to talk about losing touch. This could be losing touch with other people that you work with. If you're a senior leader, it might be losing touch with the front line. It's just generally sort of being out of touch with the people or surroundings that you're in. And I have invited my co-hosts today, Steve Friedlein and Angela Bearor, to join. Hello.
Hi, Jen.
Greetings.
Nice to have you.
Thanks for having us.
I think you might have a few thoughts on this topic of losing touch. I'm just thinking. It's so common, it's so easy, I think, to slip into this trap for all of us because we do get caught up in our own little world and we might lose the ability to connect with other people, especially people who aren't in our normal circle, people who are out doing things different than we do. Or in different parts of an organization than we work. And so we have to have extra self-awareness about this or extra mindfulness, I think, to not lose touch and get caught up in our own little bubble of thinking or our own little bubble of experience. Do you agree?
I'm 100% there. Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's not intentional a lot of times. I think that's the other thing. It's not like we plan to lose touch. And sometimes I think it's a gradual thing where, we may just not be in contact with someone for a while and then a little more time passes and then it's uncomfortable to reconnect because of the fact that we've lost touch.
It's been so long.
So sometimes it's a process rather than just a one-time event.
And a lot of times I think you could attribute the speed of change and the speed of progress to some of that. For example, how much have things changed since you started at any specific organization in the time and the point where you're at now? How many things are different from when you first started to now other people are now in that same position?
Yes.
So keeping up with the speed of that change.
When I was working on the book, we spent a chunk of time, my co-writer, we spent a chunk of time on the show called Undercover Boss. So I don't know if you guys have seen it or other people have seen it, but it's
Great show.
Such a great show because it's a senior leader who is put in costume or incognito and goes and works in the front line of their own organization and has to realize how difficult sometimes it is to do the things that the company is asking them to do or follow policy that's made somewhere in a conference room in a corporate office that actually has to be implemented in real life. Absolutely. It's a great show. It's a great example of how quickly we can lose touch.
Yes. The more you're thinking about, the faster time seems to go, right? And blow by you.
That's right.
And while we're kind of on the topic of undercover boss and bosses, this is not a perfect segue, but we're going to use it.
Okay.
Into onboarding, right?
Okay.
Onboarding
employees, new employees?
Onboarding employees, yes. The onboarding process.
Okay.
I found a great little treasure trove of statistics from Apollo Technical. So if anybody wants to check that out and look up this article, you can follow along. But I have a poll question for you, Jen and Steve. Now, according to these statistics, 1/3 of everyone who is hired will quit within their first 6 months. Their first 6 months.
Is that a true or false question?
No, that's not the poll yet. I'm just setting it up.
That's the actual statistic?
Yes. That's the first statistic. Now, So of those third that are going to quit within the first 6 months, what percentage would stay for at least 3 years or more if they had had a better onboarding process? Okay, you with me?
Oh.
What percentage would stay for 3 years or longer if their onboarding process had been better?
Okay,
Here
so
are your choices.
what took place during the onboarding influenced their decision to leave?
Correct.
Got it.
All right. 39%, 69%, or 50%.
Well, when I was working in-house, I don't know, Steve, if you two had this experience, but I remember thinking that first day of work, when someone goes to a new company or a new job, when they get home that night, if they have family there or anybody they
Yeah.
live with, the first question they ask them is, how did it go, right? How was your day? And you have to ask yourself, how are they going to answer that?
Yes. Yes, exactly. I talked earlier about the fact that sometimes this losing touch is a gradual process, and even if that first day goes okay, obviously what happens with the remainder of the onboarding is going to determine how I feel about continuing on with the organization. So I think maybe half of those people, Ange,
That's what I was going to guess,
would
50
would leave um, if the
or stay.
onboarding process, yes, would
They
stay.
would stay if it was a better onboarding. So half of those, is
So
that,
the 50% option is what you're going with, both of you. Final
that's
answer.
what my gut is telling me.
Gosh, okay, I'm feeling pressure.
Nope, just yes or no.
Yes,
This is low stakes here, Fried.
I'm,
Yeah, it
I'm
is low
sticking. I'm
stakes.
sticking. I'm sticking with the half.
Okay.
Okay.
You are both incorrect. 69%.
69.
69%.
So that's how much influence onboarding experience has.
Correct. Another very interesting side note, statistically, is that only 37% said that their manager, their direct manager, was involved in the onboarding process.
Well, that's right. Then that's something right there, isn't it?
Yes.
That if just the manager got more involved, that could have a big impact. I'm sure I don't know. In the old
Well-
days, we called it orientation, employee
Yes.
orientation, not onboarding. And we would sit in a conference room with HR and do our paperwork and maybe watch a video of the company history. I facilitated orientation at one of my jobs. And that's what it was. It was a day of welcome to the company. Here's all the paperwork. Here's how you use our cash registers. Here's a video about the history of the company. The managers were never involved.
Right. And if you think about the fact that in most of those situations, the managers would have been involved in the interview, okay? Would have
Right.
conducted the interview. I get the
Yeah.
job and now I come to work and the people that I've interviewed with are no longer a part of my experience of transitioning into the organization. So that's losing touch right there.
Yeah.
Immediately, yes. And for those of you who are managers out there or in that front line management role, where maybe you meet them at the door and walk them to HR to begin their onboard process, don't forget to check back in with them. Touch in with them throughout the process. It's not like dropping the dog off at daycare where you're just going to drop them off and then pick them up at the end of the day. Check in with them daily to see how they're doing. You need to fortify
Yeah.
that connection and that interpersonal bond right off of the back, because another interesting statistic is that the cost of replacement for that
Oh.
1/3 of employees that are leaving, right, is 50% of their salary. Again, that statistic can be found in these Apollo technical.
We'll put it in the show notes too.
Yes, yes.
Wow. It's expensive. This is big money that we spend not doing this right.
Well, and if you think about the fact that these people that are leaving, okay, so they're the person that's hired. We have all these other people that we may have interviewed that we did not choose, okay? And so now not only have we lost the person that we selected, but now we got to go through the whole process, and maybe some of those candidates that were marginal won't come back and interview again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
And it's a small thing on the manager side, right? Like it's a small thing on the frontline leader to just allocate a very minimal amount, an email or a quick phone call just to check in or just stop in if it's not a virtual type environment. to just check in, see how things are going, make them feel included, maybe even invite them to some group meetings that are happening before the onboarding process is completely finished, because it's almost like those employees are invisible. They don't count until they're
Right.
done with that onboarding
Right.
process, and then they come in.
Well, and we have to think again, as the onboarding process has changed with so many fewer people coming into the office on a regular basis. Formerly, when people were onboarded, they would be introduced in person to everyone on the team. And I have to wonder, as you're sharing those statistics, Ange, how many of those folks met people virtually, didn't really have an opportunity to interact over, the water cooler, um, that sort of thing that may
Yeah.
also impact the fact that we're losing touch with those folks right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a virtual workforce, it's just so easy to lose touch. So often people will say, we lost our small talk time. We lost our just checking in. It feels like you have to schedule a time for a meeting, and then there has to be an agenda or a reason, and then you don't often get that just checking in, which keeps you connected.
Yeah.
I had a coachee once who was a leader, and she told, and they were an all virtual organization.
Okay.
And she told me that they would schedule 15 extra minutes onto their daily meeting for things specifically like that. It could be catching up on sports. It could be catching up on a big show at the time. Game of Thrones was very popular, so everybody, the next morning would want to talk about the show to try and really keep those bonds alive and well,
Yep.
and foster that common ground, common interest.
Well, I think it shows us the importance of building rapport early on with new hires, finding common ground with them. What are their interests? How can we help them get connected in ways that are going to be meaningful to them?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. So if we talk about the 3 R's, recognizing, reading, and responding. So being able to recognize, when am I sort of working in my own little zone? How long has it been since I've reached out to somebody I haven't talked to in a while? When have I reached out to ask them how they're doing and not just focused on the task at hand? And then sort of reading them and picking up signals that they might need more than they're getting is really important. And I think too, we had another client who's global, and they would schedule meetings when it was convenient for the headquarters. And I joined some of those meetings, and I happened to be closer to the time zone of the headquarters. But a lot of the people that were joining were joining from either Asia Pac or India, Asia, and it was like 11 o'clock at night their time. And I remember thinking, how often do you guys schedule these meetings at this time? Well, every meeting is scheduled at this time. And I said to the leaders, how about you mix it up a little bit? Once in a while, do it at the convenience of the bulk of the people attending this meeting, and not just stay in your little corporate bubble again and schedule everything around what's good for corporate.
Yeah, exactly.
Small thing like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we've talked about actually losing touch and disconnecting, but I think losing touch with the needs of the people around me is another part of this, really. Mm-hmm. To what extent? And I think the example you just gave is great, Jen. If I know someone is on a 3-hour different time zone from me, what can I do to help make sure that when we do connect, it's going to be beneficial not only to me, but to them?
Right. So it's not at 6 a.m. their time or 9 p.m. their time.
Yes.
They might be at their best.
Yes.
So I want to transition to an example that I heard recently, and I'd love your opinion on it. And this is, I think this is one of the casualties of the hybrid work or work from home phase that we're all coming out of, because this is an employee who had worked from home for, I think, since 2020, since the beginning of the pandemic. And actually, I think they were a work from home even before, because it was a tech person, so they could work remote. And so I think when they came to the company they're with now, they had been a remote worker for about 6-7 years. And so it's almost like they're coming out of their shell, right? This is their first time in office in quite a long time. And I don't know this person. I heard this secondhand, so take that for what it is. But I understand that this person was trying really hard to make connections and make friends and maybe even date some of his coworkers, because this is the only group of people this person has been around, right? And so he invites himself to a table at lunch. They have a company cafeteria. There's a group of ladies sitting at a table, and he stops by and says, "Can I join you?" So of course, them trying to be nice and polite say, "Sure." They don't know him that well, but sure, come have a seat. And apparently, over the lunch conversation, this person shared several inappropriate things that had to do with personal life stuff, things asking about the topics we normally don't talk about at work: money, religion, medical procedures, like really uncomfortable things at the lunch table. And apparently, this person left thinking everything was fine, but the women at the table were really upset, or at least bothered enough by the conversation. They went and talked to that guy's boss's boss and said, "Hey, these are some of the things that were brought up over lunch. It made us really uncomfortable. We really don't think we want to hang out with him anymore. Can you talk to him?" And, sort of set him straight a little bit on what he should say and not say at work. So what do you guys think? I see both sides of this. So I'd love to know your opinion on how this could have gone maybe better for everybody. Because I think this is going to keep happening.
Yeah. How did you know we'd have an opinion, Jennifer?
I know. That's what I count on you for.
So I just have a quick follow-up question to your story. While this was happening, as he was bringing up these inappropriate topics, did anyone mention anything in the moment?
Apparently not, because I talked to some of the leaders that were notified of what happened, and they talked to him about it and kind of brought up the lunch and said, "Tell me about this lunch." He let on nothing. He had no clue that anything was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone had been willing to speak up and share their discomfort in a reasonable, thoughtful sort of way, maybe the outcome would have been a little different. Maybe. I don't know. What do you think, Jen? Ange?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think if we are going to examine this under an emotional intelligence lens, right, recognize, reading, and responding, where was their response? And possibly some of that reading, right? Did they know that, he's been kind of, I have these visions of an IT person locked in a cave with just the glow of their computer screen,
Right. He's finally out in the world.
Yes, they finally let him. They finally let him escape, and now he's kind of like, it's almost like someone coming through a time warp, like he has to relearn all of the kind of social rules, and it could have just been something as easy as, could you please not share that? Or, I'm not comfortable with that conversation. I'm kind of saddened that no one took the time to just mention that to him.
And Ange, you mentioned reading and responding. Their response was to someone outside the conversation. Okay. And if you think about how gossip comes about, or difficult situations, because instead of approaching the person that I really need to speak with, I'm going to have a conversation with someone else that's going to get back to that person in a way that I may not have intended. So I think choosing to respond outside of that scenario created what I would imagine was a probably difficult scenario, especially for the person getting the feedback.
Well, I mean, I'm sure it was awkward for all of them. It's even awkward to be able to say to this person, it's not polite to ask about money, right? Or income or whatever. But I'm going to sound really old here. So I'm just going to caveat that. I have to say, I miss the days when at work we did not talk about politics, religion. We did not talk about money. We did not talk about personal medical issues. Like, it wasn't okay to talk about that stuff. And I was fine with it. I don't care what you do in your personal, like, I don't need to know that in order to work well with you, right? I don't need to know who you voted for in the last election in order to work with you. But our workplaces have gotten so blurry, I feel like, with this sharing who you are, bring all of you to work, share everything you are. I think that's leading to trouble. I would like to see us move back a little bit more to the, I don't need to know everything about you, and I don't need to have you know everything about me, and we both need to be okay with that.
Yeah, I think yes, I totally concur with
it's
the
old
blur.
School. I know.
It is old school. But the fact is, we went from a time where we said, when I come to work, I talk about work. When I'm home, there was a separation. People came to work, they left at the end of the day, they went home. Then the blur has come about partially because of the fact that people are working at home now. Okay. So when I start talking about what's going on in my life, it's not just what I did at work, it's like what I did at home while I was working. And it gets even more convoluted, I think, when you continue to look at that lack of separation.
Well, but we had go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
I was just thinking we had that other client where there was a group of employees that were all in the same department, and they had a habit of going out after work and going to the bar and hanging out. And pretty soon then, they were personal friends and work friends. And then two of them had a fight outside of work over a guy, and now they don't want to sit next to each other at the office. And now, HR and the team is like, what do we do with this? Because it all happened outside of work, and it's all over things that have nothing to do with work. But now we have to deal with this. What are we going to do?
I think it's safe to say we've struck a nerve on every count.
I know.
And
so frustrating.
And we go back to the situation that you described, and I would guess that nerves were struck throughout that conversation and the follow-up that took place. Just as we're having a conversation about that scenario, I can only imagine emotions probably ran high for a long time with the follow-up to that situation.
How is he supposed to learn? You can't, and it's almost like, when people say you shouldn't bother police with such a little thing, they have real things to worry about, they have real bad guys to catch. It's kind of like, doesn't HR have more important things to do than be like the little office police people and act as those like interim, I'm going to go to HR. I'm going to go to HR. Just maybe take 5 seconds and talk to this young man or this gentleman and
in person,
and help him.
Directly.
Directly. Don't put your level of comfort above his best interests, which essentially that's what they're doing. And I think we can boil that all down to lack of empathy.
Yes. Lack of empathy.
I would agree. Oh,
yeah,
my
on
goodness.
both sides. In fairness, on both sides. He obviously did not read what was going on. I'm guessing there were a few glances between them. There were probably some body language signals they were sending that he completely missed.
Yeah. So I guess what we're saying is we need to be on high alert
yes.
for signals that are coming our way.
Yes. And if you sense you're losing touch, be careful with how you go back in. Don't touch too much. Right? We don't want to overcorrect here.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks. I think this is a very interesting topic. And I think if we all have that self and social awareness, we notice when we're drifting, we notice when we're losing touch with either our employees or coworkers or even friends and family, and then realize what life is like for them from their experience of it and their perspective of it, have those conversations instead of sitting in silence and being upset, we'll all be better off. Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for joining us today. It was a lot of fun, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us today on the Ego versus EQ and You podcast. If you liked this episode, be sure to follow us or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please share our show with others. For questions or future topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@jenshirkani.com. Until next time, keep using your EQ and show ego who's boss.